Larger-than-life characters are what defines pro wrestling. My name is Emir. This is Victoire. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like, and share these videos. In the early 2000s, wrestling had changed dramatically. WCW was purchased by WWF at the time, and new superstars were on the rise. One in particular, and today's guest, was certainly a masterpiece during that time frame. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Chris, the Masterpiece Masters.
Victoire. Victoire gives a special thanks to the EWF and Mr. Jesse Hernandez, as well as SoCal Wrestling TV. Find the app for free on Roku. Staying healthy can be a challenge, but not with Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market. Find the highest quality organic produce and supplements available in the USA. A tattoo is for life, so ensure that your tattoo artist is the very best in the country. Trusted tattoo company and mobile body art bus. Football, baseball, golf, whatever your sport of choice, whenever you visit Palm Springs in the Coachella Valley, visit Legends and Icons, your #1 choice for sports bars.
Palm Springs, California, Indian Wells, California, Rancho Mirage, California. They're all considered a destination hotspot, a second home haven. With an exquisite record of negotiating the finest deals for clients, Lowell Folsom III and Associates always deliver. Contact Lowell today at 760-391-2504.
Now, on with the show.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Victoire. And today I am joined by a masterpiece from the early 2000s in the WWE. Of course, an Impact star, an NWA star. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chris, the Masterpiece Masters. Chris, welcome to the show, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be on, and it's good to see you again, since obviously we know each other from a little bit from going way back.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all is well, man.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff, man. Yeah. And you're traveling right now. You're doing an indie show this weekend. You're out there. So,
Yeah. Dominant Championship Wrestling over here in Selma, North Carolina. So, just having some fun over here. Nice, really warm weather. Although, unfortunately for me, I went downstairs in my swim trunks with a towel just to find that the pool is closed. And apparently has been closed for a long time, which, kind of sucks for me, but what you going to do?
Yeah. Well, as long as you got a gym somewhere in there, you'll be good.
Actually, I took the week off.
You
took
did?
the week off. Yeah, I went to visit family, and I feel like it's good for your body every once in a while to do that. So I just allowed myself to do that. And actually, I do feel pretty damn good. And when I looked in the mirror, I actually felt a bit fuller. So maybe I just needed a little healing time, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've started practicing that too, because it impacts your nervous system when you lift weights. So to give it a break, I try and do 8 weeks on, 1 week off. And I just kind of stick to that cycle, and it kind of helps.
Well, yeah, and I've been doing a lot. I mean, I've been kind of a maniac about it, where I've been doing 5 days straight, some days 7 days straight, just to kind of fit with my traveling schedule. So that's why I kind of felt like, you know what, I've been such a maniac and barely taking any days off. Let's take a week and just let, beyond even just the nervous system, just to let the joints and all the ligaments just have a little break for a minute and get back to but the hard part about a break is always getting back in the groove, just like it is for somebody who hasn't trained, just starting. Right. You have to you kind of get that groove and get some momentum going again and get that feeling back. And so, that's it.
Yeah. All right, Chris. So now we're going to dive in. We're going to take a trip down memory lane, because this is what it's all about. Finding out how you became who you are today, the man behind the masterpiece. So Chris, take us back to your early life, your childhood, for viewers that aren't familiar. How did you get your start in pro wrestling, and who were you as a young child? Who was Chris back then?
As an outdoor kid, I liked, we liked to skateboard. Me and my friends bike. We used to take slingshots and shoot berries at people's windows, and we were kind of menace children. But wrestling was always kind of a thing. I mean, it was the primary, like once I was 8, maybe 7 or 8 years old, it became my thing. As a kid, you go through a lot of things. But from the point in which I became a wrestling mark, it became the thing, if not kind of the backdrop for a while, because I did enjoy basketball. So there was a point where I was mainly liking basketball, and I didn't, I took a couple of years off watching. But I also was the guy, I'd be in the front yard, putting my friends in figure 4 leg locks, and we tried sharpshooters on each other. So, just active kids, and kind of Dennis the Menace like kids, but still kind of harmless at the same time. But so I briefly stopped watching, and then I started once again right around the end of 1995. And there was no looking back. I got so caught up in what was happening at that time. I was like just back in 110%. It was my thing. And now I was older too. So that's kind of says something when you were a fan when you're young and you have a little bit of lapse, but then you come back to it and now it's your thing again. Yeah. Like I think people like that usually probably are lifers in one degree or another. But yeah, it became my thing. And then little did I know it had become my thing. Like I guess it really just made complete sense because, once I was 15, 16 years old, I obsessed about it. I was, doing it in the hallways of high school and, doing backyard wrestling federations. And so once I finally took a look at oh, what am I going to do with myself? It's like, well, I guess it's just got to be wrestling. And I also knew that, I might have my dad, from what I knew, was a muscular guy, so I knew I kind of had those things maybe going for me too, I think.
Yeah.
And I was already a tall kid, so that kind of stuff obviously helps.
Yeah.
Or at least to not have a deficit in those areas is nice, or an advantage. So and then what kind of broke me into wrestling was, I think what happened is my mom actually saw a clip of some of the backyard wrestling we were doing, which was brutally physical. It's like taking backdrops on just grass yard, which is basically kind of like floor. I mean, it's not as hard as cement, but it's still, there's no give to that.
Right.
And from that point, she was like, you know what, if you're going to be doing this, we're going to take you to a school and you're just going to learn to do it. So, you don't kill yourself essentially. And, I just think she saw that it was probably my dream. She had pushed me towards acting and modeling, which I did do a lot of that growing up in LA. Yeah. And, so I did do a lot of that, but I think once it came down to, this point, it was really clear, oh, this is really what, and it still was in line with entertainment. So I think she didn't mind it completely, but, no mom is going to like to see their kid, getting hit with a chair or just getting beat up.
Yeah. But you talk about going all in. I remember vividly when I first met you, 2002. You're a young guy, and I remember the first thing I thought, you're going to be in WWE, because you had gone all in to the presentation. Your physique and everything at the time was so impressive. So tell us what that mindset did in terms of, because I presume that your social life may have suffered a little bit because you were so intense about doing this. But you tell me. I mean, were you able to still live like a teenager, or were you?
No, I think my social life was, it was non-existent. In terms of I do remember I had to cut off hanging out with a lot of my closest friends, but that was because I had to, I was going to school at one point, working a job and working another job and doing wrestling training. So there just really kind of wasn't, and a lot of my friends that I kind of grew up with, again, even from young, we're still kind of they just wanted that fun and mess with people and just kind of be juvenile. And I just there was a point where I knew that okay, there's no room for this anymore for me, and I need to focus. And once I did enroll in wrestling training initially, it was kind of more of a wake up call for me, because I did get injured a couple months in, and I had to have surgery. But also I realized that I needed to spend a lot more time on kind of what you were talking about, and that was building up my body and and building a physique, because that's what they were really looking at that point. So not everybody knows that, but I had to take a couple of years off, and then I had to kind of take on bodybuilding much more as it became a hobby. It was something I love, and I took it up to, get me back into. It was all about getting into pro wrestling. It was never about let me start bodybuilding and now let me try to compete in the USA's or the California or become Mr. Olympia. Never had aspirations for that, but I did become. You can't help become a fan of it, and you take some interest. You learn from some of these guys different things not to do, things to do. You know what I mean? So it's a fun little hobby to take up, and it can be a fun and it can be a healthy lifestyle when done proper.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think definitely you hit the nail on the head there. Healthy lifestyle in terms of the way that bodybuilding teaches you to eat, teaches you to sleep, teaches you, it teaches you so many things about the body that even now, 20, 30 years later, they're finally catching up to us and, oh yeah, that's good. That's good for you. Yeah, do that, and
it's just and also it's a serious lesson in discipline, because any one of us who has gone, like, not to say we do, like, there's guys who still do this, obviously, but once you learn that, you have to train consistently, you have to eat consistently, like, it's not just something you do when you train, it becomes a much more involved than that. So I think that becomes a big learning thing about it.
Yeah. So now tell us, Chris, obviously I know about UPW. I went there for a little while. So was that the only school that you trained at under Rick Bassman, or did you train elsewhere?
It was pretty much a straight shot. I went to Bassman, and I learned a lot of fundamentals, but even more importantly, just got looked at because he had that kind of connections for the West Coast. And next stop was OVW. So I really didn't do any independent wrestling or like a lot of the guys, the indies I work today. I'll see young guys coming up who have worked for indies for 1, 2, 3 years, and it's just it's interesting. And I'll work a lot of these guys, but like I'd never gone through that. That's that's much tougher, obviously, than what I had. But what was my ticket around that time is once I did come back to training with UPW after that layoff, I came back and I was pretty much what would be the masterpiece. I mean, I was, I obviously, there was supplementation and whatnot, but it was more about like, I had great genetics and my body responded so well that once I came back, like I was 18 years old, but I had the body of a guy much older in a good way, meaning, and I had muscle maturity. You know what I mean? And that's what kind of separated me at that point. It's like they'd never, I was a big kid, but also a big kid that had a physique that looked a lot more mature than his age. And I think it made people think I was much older too. I don't know. You know what I mean? I looked like I could have passed for 28, 30, 32, you know what I mean? And that was a regular theme kind of from about 18 on, because I did work as a bouncer too before I was even legal to do it. So, I always looked progressively older, but mainly once I started kind of putting on some weight and stuff and filling out.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember that first day I met you and you told me you were 18 and my jaw almost hit the floor. I couldn't believe,
it was crazy.
Yeah, it was.
But I mean, again, then that was just, one thing I did have, and still, it's good genetics. It responded really well. And like, there's a lot of other guys out there, tons, thousands that could have done the exact same thing and not responded to which I did. But anyways, back to the original thing. So yeah, it was from UPW to OVW. And then, obviously once I was in OVW, I was signed by WWE. So that was the next step.
So what was that like for you? Because you were so young at that time. I mean, when you first got there, were you nervous or you've been so immersed in this world that it just felt natural to you?
No, super nervous, intimidated by everything, didn't learn proper etiquette, so got a lot of crap for that. Got myself a lot of heat for just looking the way I looked and like, maybe not, you just like, I've always been like, people who know me know, like, I don't have a bad heart or anything like that, but like, I would tend to like say the wrong thing at certain points back then, or maybe I was just, cocky kid too on top of it, I guess. But, but like I was intimidated by everything. And even more so, OVW was very intimidating, but it became very fun because it was like, there was a bond amongst the group. It was kind of like all of our college, we were around the same age, and anybody who was much older was just part of the group anyway and was like kind of a mentor. I mean, it was a really cool vibe. And it was it's the last bit of innocence before you get to that next level where it becomes much more about money and don't sink or swim and that
Yeah.
type of stuff.
Yeah.
So it started out intimidating, but was a blast. But then like going into WWE and starting on their roster was like next level intimidation, because now it's not like a bunch of guys like my peers. Now I'm with essentially one of a handful of guys who have now been put in this locker room with guys that I grew up watching, looking up to, some of them like idolizing when in reference to like HBK, and then you got Ric Flair, all of them. So and you can't. It's not that you can convey that, because you have to put on a mask and you have to be professional and not. You can't like be a mark about it.
Right.
Like I mean, and there's a time you can do that stuff, but like that's not the way you want to present. You want to present yourself professional and like, but and very respectful, obviously.
Yeah.
But also, you don't want to be a mark, because you'll be walked on or looked at with less respect, so to speak. So, it was a lot to handle, but also, it wasn't all bad. Obviously, it was a lot that was very exciting. I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's nerve wracking, but again, sharing a locker room with guys like that, Nate, Hunter, HBK, on down the list, Edge, all of them, that's very cool, because I mean, that's where, anybody who's aspired to be in the business, people who aren't in the business, who are just fans, like everybody wants to be in that spot, or even just to be a fly on the wall and be, to hear the dialogue, but, even more so just to be one of their peers and be, part of the team, so to speak.
Yeah. A couple of things from that, Chris, because I know you've got a good relationship with your mom. So obviously now you leave. So your mom's back in California. Was that, did she come out and see you a lot when you were going through OVW?
No, she doesn't travel. And like, but I did come visit LA a couple times and stuff like that. But I mean, it's just, you can't always, if she traveled, I'm sure she would have come down, but she just doesn't.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. I don't know if she's scared of flying or whatever, but maybe I didn't invite her to Louisville. I don't know, as a matter of fact, but but I'm sure it was difficult for her. For me, I was just like being 18, like I was ready. Like I was a little scared and all that, but I was ready to like, let me start my life. Let's do it. I wasn't like one of those 18-year-olds who was reluctant by any means. Like once the opportunity came, like, I was nervous and scared about going to a new place, but also there was no part of me that was like thinking of doing anything. I was like, let's do this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, no hesitation.
Did WWE or OVW, did they help you? Because obviously you were so young. Did they help you adjust to like, oh, well, getting an apartment, getting all this other stuff that maybe you hadn't already become accustomed to?
There's people who did that. Like I said, we had veterans there too. Nova, Simon Dean was a guy who had a lot more life experience, so he kind of walked me through some of that. And we had Dr. Tom Pritchard was another person you can kind of refer. There was plenty of people. Like WWE didn't appoint that. WWE was kind of very hands off, as looking back at it too, for the most part. I mean, they would come in every once in a while and get reports. I'm sure see the tapes, but there was plenty of people to kind of help you out with that. If not, the office, it would be again like a Nova or one of the other vets who was there at the time, or even somebody who was just, maybe a little older than you, to walk you through it.
Yeah. Now, in terms of your training, because obviously you become the Masterpiece. Now, that moniker itself, had you come up with that, or was that what WWE put on you, the Masterpiece?
It came up in OVW. It was a few months in, and I was just Chris Masters, I think, at that point. And now, again, to refer back to my mom is kind of funny, because she always argued this and says she came up with the nickname. But what I remember is sitting around a table, and it was like Matt Morgan, and it might have been like Chris Cage and maybe even Johnny Jr., some of the old OVW crew. Yeah. And Matt Morgan out of nowhere had said Masterpiece. And it was just right away, just knew it was a word, because I also knew kind of at that point that like everybody there was built and had good builds and looks and stuff, but I had learned at that point that I was being looked at like kind of that next level of that. Like I was like a body guy, you know what I mean? Where that was almost kind of like the focus.
Yeah.
So that then when you tie Masterpiece, it just made sense. Oh, it's like, okay, Masterpiece Chris Mask, perfect. And
Yeah.
then in terms of the mask block, that came much later with WWE, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. And now when you're on the road, because now this is a big difference. You know, when you're at home, you can work out on your time. Now you're traveling, there's less sleep. How did you adjust to that?
It's just difficult. I mean, you have to learn how to travel.
Mhm.
And that's another thing that, you get pointers from the vets or people like here and there, and I don't remember if people sat me down and told me A, B, C, D, but
Mhm.
sometimes even just watching them. But so yeah, it was difficult, but I typically, from what I remember, we were always able to get them in.
Mhm.
But what I learned very quickly is like a lot of times you had to like you didn't have a lot of time to stop and smell the roses or take a long time anywhere. It
Right.
was usually expedited. So like you'd get to the gym and you'd have, you might have maybe an hour in and out, you know what I mean? Like you have to be out of there and ready to go by like
Mhm.
60. So then your workout's going to be a little shorter because whatever you got to change. At one point there was a dress code, so you had to change. So it just became you just learned that it wasn't the same. You couldn't just stop and kind of enjoy the workout. A lot of times you had to kind of move, get it
Yeah.
done, get in, get out,
Yeah.
grab something to eat, be to the building at 5:30 so that you can now be in the ring, especially if you're new for that.
Yeah.
Work with the agents, and then eventually go over your match. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean it was difficult, but it's not impossible. It's just it's never going to be perfect on the road
Right.
for
Right. Yeah.
those reasons. Especially even more so with the eating,
Yeah.
obviously, is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, yeah, a lot more difficult. But they packaged you as the masterpiece. I remember your debut. Like I said you came out, what were you weighing in at that time? Because you were huge back then. Like, what was your weight?
I was roughly around 270. I
Okay.
mean, I think there was a point where I went up to 280, but I wasn't as lean and hard at
Mhm.
280. So like I wouldn't say it was a better 280, you know what I mean? But like me and my ideal like early big weight was about 275. And
Okay.
like in reference to now, like now my weight's between it's usually stays around 260, but it can go down to about 255. Anywhere in between there is kind of where I stay. So, you
Okay.
know, uh, 15 pounds doesn't sound like a lot, but
Mhm.
when you think of it as ground beef on a table coming off
Yeah.
your body, I mean,
Yeah.
that kind of gives a better example of it. But I mean, 260 pounds is still obviously nothing to,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. And you're 6'4", right, Chris? If I recall.
yes.
Six
Yeah.
four. Yeah. Now, but again, as a teenager, going back slightly, so way back when you were very slim, correct? So you would have been
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much? How much were you weighed back then?
I was just skinny, like skinny, but I had height. So I remember somebody gave me the tip of when you're lifting weights, the key is to eat and eat a ton, and like just like that is it. Like just eat as much as you can. And
Yeah.
I really adopted that
Yeah.
because I don't know, I really just took that to heart, and I'd eat and then I'd drink like cartons of milk on top of the meal just to get maximum calories. And yeah, and I did all that to fill out. And I did, I put on a lot of weight, but I did get like really, I mean, basically fat for me
Yeah.
because, at a certain point, I had big cheeks and
Yeah.
a tire around my waist. And,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wasn't attracting the ladies as much as I used to. But,
Yeah.
it dawned on me. I did have, and it wasn't, I had planned it that way. I planned on dieting eventually.
Yeah.
But it was funny because I just woke up one day and looked in the mirror and all of a sudden you're just, hmm,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think if we would have had camera phones and stuff back then, I would have been made aware much sooner, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I remember, yeah, back in the days it was the same that in England in the late 90s it was the Mega Mass 3000, the Joe Weider supplement. Mega Mass 3000 is what we
Oh,
had.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
you drink it, it was like 3,000 friggin' calories in one shot.
Oh yeah, I forget that whole part. The weight gainers.
Yeah.
Yeah, those teach you a lot of discipline too because they're so hard to drink
Yeah.
that like you really have to want it and be determined. Because I know most people won't consume that kind of stuff. So like, and I feel like I'm well versed in that. I'm well trained. Like I can consume some nasty stuff, and I'm not talking about like fear factor, like
Yeah.
bugs and stuff like that. But like when it comes to like supplements, you can't really put a bad supplement like that tastes bad, that's good for you in front of me that I won't take. You know what I mean? I've learned the art of it. I'm well
Yeah,
trained in it.
yeah,
But those
yeah.
weight gainers were terrible. They
Yeah.
were terrible, man. You really had to like sip that and like just guzzle it down. And I don't
Yeah.
know. There were techniques to it. Well, luckily I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, there were definitely techniques to it, definitely techniques to bulking up like that, but you have to go to that extreme. You can't bulk up any other way. It's not going to happen. So, but Chris, you're in WWE now, and you're in there with, like I said, you got blessed to be in there with a group of guys that you'd been growing up watching. So, what was some of
Yeah.
the highlights for you, some of the angles or some of your favorite matches when you were in WWE?
Uh, I said this a lot in interviews, but you know, I worked on the live events, which were known as the house shows at one point too, which are all the basically non-televised shows that people don't see. You know, like every week before Monday Night Raw, we would be in a city the day before, just wrestling for that arena and that house. And then the day before, the same thing in another city. And then the day before in another city. And so in those shows, I got to work a string of not like a few months where, you know, it would be various combinations of me and Triple H versus Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair, or even sometimes Carlito and myself versus like Shawn and the Big Show, or you know, Edge and myself versus Shawn and Flair. And like what made those stand out the most is because you get to see the top guys in the business, guys obviously, like you said, that you've looked up to, but you see them and the way they work and also how relaxed they are at a live event.
Mhm.
But really it's the same way they work, I think, even when it comes to television and stuff like that, which was a huge learning lesson for me, because when you're early on in your wrestling journey, so to speak,
Mhm.
a lot of times you're frantic and nervous, and that's the way you communicate stuff in the ring to people. And
Mhm.
you know, and then but also just watching the way they would have fun in it. Like they would like there would be a big difference between how they would work on the house shows from television, and on the house shows it was a lot more. They do a lot more goofy spots. They have a lot more fun. You know, like you know they'd save their bodies a little more by incorporating more of that stuff, and like you know just be a blast. Like we would do the spot a lot where you know, it'd be me and Edge or me or Hunter and myself, and we would do the thing where we shoot both of them off and they sunset flip us, and then they pull our tights down from the back. So now, you know, both of our asses are out for the crowd, and then we collide to each other. Or even on one of the spot, you know, I remember one time Rick didn't make it, so Rick didn't make it, so I ended up doing that spot where they pulled my tights down. I remember I kicked him in the head, and I got to climb up the top rope just like Rick would have done, but with my tights down and take the press slam. So like that kind of stuff, you know, that's everything. That's it right there. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously working on Raw and pay-per-views, I mean, that's like awesome, but like to be able to just have fun
Yeah.
with these guys is
Yeah.
like, and see, you know, how they approach their approach to the various, you know, whether it be television or live events, premium live events.
Yeah.
That was very cool. And it was just a good learning lesson. It was just, it taught me to like, you know, to communicate calm. And it showed me just kind of how they carry themselves and all the
Mhm.
little things that like, you know, outside of just their moves said and all that.
Yeah. We talk about being more goofy on those live shows without the cameras rolling. Very reminiscent to the indies, you know, with the indies, you've got to really canter to that crowd. So you got to have that experience, like I said, the other way around, because you didn't have to travel the independent circuit. What was some of the toughest things for you during your WWE tenure? Toughest things to deal with?
You know, like with WWE, you don't really it can be difficult because you don't get any clear answer sometimes of why you were being used or not used or why you're doing this or that. And it can really or even if you're just not being used,
Mhm.
and it can be a real mind effort for a
Mhm.
lot of different ways. And also, as everybody's already heard time and time again, obviously it can be political as well.
Mhm.
But so you know, all that stuff was difficult. But again, like I think each run in itself was different for different reasons. I mean, when I first came to I started on the roster, the crew was again guys who I'd mainly kind of grown up watching. And then by the time I'd come back the second time, you had a lot more guys who were shoot, had broken in after I did, at least my first run initially,
Mhm.
you know, or broken in shortly after or whatever. You know,
Yeah.
like the Kofi Kingstons and even the Cody Rhodes and those types. So you know, it was just different challenges. Like the second time was more difficult because, well, I'm not going to say it was more difficult, but it was a different difficult because obviously I wasn't being used,
Mhm.
and then I got subjected to, you know, where like I had a good run on the B show, which was Superstars, where I was able to really kind of craft my wrestling and become actually really good in the ring because I was having longer matches, and even though I didn't have a lot of TV time, the crowds would still eventually get behind me because they saw the quality of work and because it was early too in the show. I mean, that would help.
Yeah.
But it was because my output was getting pretty good out there. But you know, so just to work real hard and then but you're getting no push, you know, that presents its own kind of set of problems and like what do I have to do type of thing,
Mhm.
as opposed to, you know, the first run there was none of that because
Right.
I was pushed right from the start. And even when I got depushed, that was kind of clear was because I had, you know, I had popped on the test. I also had to go to rehab. So once I came back, I didn't know this was going to happen, but you know, I was kind of demoted a bit and doing jobs for people I wouldn't have been doing jobs for before.
Mhm.
You know, kind of signaling a loss in faith.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but at least you know, at least I can understand that, right? But you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so different issues.
Yeah, yeah. But did you now coming over that because someone who may be watching this may be going through what you went through. So your issue was it was with pain, correct? It was the pain medication that you got.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and so people like here's the thing about that time. So I went to rehab, and then when I came back, I was much lighter as far as my weight.
Mhm.
And so that rushed everybody. And understandably, when you look back at it, if you think of my gimmick and what was going on and stuff,
Right.
it rushed everybody to think that, oh, it was steroids was my issue, or why was it rehab, or why what I had popped on the drug test. But and again, it's understandable because it was me, and
Right.
for that time, like,
Right.
and then you come back lighter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
here's the thing: if I would have known that upper, I would have prioritized keeping weight on much more. But anyways, so really, I was going through was an addiction to prescription pills.
Mhm.
That was my huge issue. That was the reason I went to rehab, and it was kind of, you know, it was I was bound to die or it was going to kill me if I kept going at the rate I was. And, you know, it happened slowly and progressively got worse and worse. Had a super high tolerance, was taking a lot. So,
Mhm.
you know, I didn't really prioritize at that point, like physique stuff. You're just trying to find the will to get to the next day and like
Mhm.
not, you know, keep your mental state positive and not be sick and all that type of stuff. It's way bigger than anything when it comes to like, oh, you know, how am I gonna maintain 275 pounds ripped and
Yeah.
that's so, you know, anyways, yeah, prescription pills was the thing. You know, went to rehab and for I think it was 60 days, but that also was a tremendous experience for me. I went to a pretty cool place with a bunch of guys around my age.
Mhm.
They would have fit in a wrestling locker room. I mean, we pulled ribs on each other and
Yeah.
like, you know, it was in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. And so, yeah, it was a cool experience, but you know, it sucked. It did suck to be going through that in my
Mhm.
life at that point because it was definitely an issue I didn't need. It was definitely an issue that derailed me and
Right.
you know, kind of like permanent derailed me because ever since it's been hard to really get back on track. You know, there's
Mhm.
always it's been hard to get that momentum.
Yeah, yeah. Because so then you come back to WWE, the roster's changed, everything's changed. You've changed when the Kofi Kingstons came around. In fact, the style had changed by then. You know, I mean, everything's changed dramatically. So, did you enjoy that as much as the earlier 2000s? Like on a personal level, did you enjoy it as much?
Well, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it as much because again, the first one you're working with guys that like literally could be on your bucket list or
Right.
your, you know, so like there's nothing that's going to tie. And it's the first time it's all new and fresh and exciting. And you're still a little more connected to the mark that you were,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? and
Yeah.
all of that. So, the next, and then, we come around the second time, you're not going to get as excited when you have a lot of guys who have now, that you were never fans of, but, not to say that you're not fans of them, but, these are guys who started after you didn't grow up on them. They're your peers.
Right.
So, but, again, I just enjoyed the challenge of, I found out pretty early on, like, oh, they're not, I'm getting absolutely no push, you know what I mean, or anything like that. I'm out of favor. But I was getting, again, I did end up eventually getting a lot of time on Superstars, and I was given um, a lot of time to work with on Superstars, and I started having great matches. And like, just the idea of like, well, you know what, let me do everything I can to get as good as I can. Like, to limit the amount of reasons they could say no. And also just for my own, I had been accused so long because of the way I look at being just a body guy, bodybuilder, doesn't know how to work. And that's really kind of unfair when you look at my first year and the guys I had to work with. Like, I actually hang pretty well, and I didn't move. Even when you just look at the way I move, it wasn't like I moved around like a robotic bodybuilder or anything.
Right.
Like, I was fluent
Yeah.
for a big guy at the very least.
Yeah.
But it takes time to develop this art. You know what I mean? There's no way I could have been like, the way I can perform now is way better than it was in that second run, definitely in that first run.
Yeah.
But that's because I've maintained health and I have the the experience. But so just going out there and trying to have the best matches possible and just focusing on that and trying to show people that I can work and like overcome the critics. That became fun. And like, got to the point where I remember, like, for what it's worth, because it is Superstars, I was on a win streak, like winning every week, and they got, like, it was building at least as much momentum as you could from that show. But I'm sure that where it comes down to, it doesn't really matter, because like, you can look at something like that or Matt Cardona, and like, maybe the fans would love you or get over, but like, if Vince or Hunter are not in on it, then it doesn't matter, because it's still like, what I mean, it's still up to them at the end of the day. If Vince doesn't like you, what I mean, that's it. I mean, you can be the greatest in the world, but he's not gonna push you. So I don't know, if I'm not saying I was a victim of that, but I definitely wasn't used and then eventually let go. And but I become like, CM Punk had even referenced in one of his kind of work shoot promos about how good I'd done. And which, again, I like that he mentioned, and primarily because I know that's how he really felt, because he had mentioned that to me before and acknowledged that. So even though, it's a work shoot promo, like that, he had, for people who don't know, he had referenced me, Harry, and somebody else in the promo after we got released. And it was kind of a shock thing to do and kind of a shoot thing. But, again, he had credited me for getting really good and working my ass off to get better, I think is what he said. So, I made that part fun. And I also just felt, for a while there, I was just kind of happy to, like, have a job again or just to be back. You know what I mean? I wasn't necessarily as hungry as I should be initially, like, but, I ended up getting there. You starve long enough, they're not using you, you're sitting around at catering. Actually, you're doing the opposite of starving, because you're sitting around at television and just eating catering all throughout the day, really. So, but, no, that's the tough part, because no performer wants to do that. You know what I mean? Even for the guys who are under contract and making money, like, man, that's great. Like, and some people look at that like, wish they just had that. But the grass is always greener, because even that person, shoot, they're probably dying to be used.
Yeah.
They're like dying. Like, they got the money, but they wanted to, and we got a whole business of people of those, And the unfortunate part, though, is, there is such a level of delusion in wrestling, you know what I mean? And I think, and I've told people this, I think every single person in business has a level of delusion, but there's certain people who have it on a level that is just intolerable to be around. And then that's not even always, I'm not even talking about guys who are, at the top of the business. I'm just talking about, we're talking about some indie guys, they think they're like the greatest talent, but then, you see their work and you're like, you got to be kidding. Like, do you not watch yourself?
Yeah. Well, that's
sorry,
important.
I'm all over the place.
No, but Chris, you're at a point now where you can bestow wisdom. You've been in it for, gosh, what is it, 20 something years? Over 20 years now. You've been doing this. So
it's crazy.
you're in that position where you can educate those people. Like you said, you got to build a brand. One of the things you talked about there is you sit on the sidelines, you may have the money, but your brand's going nowhere because that's the thing that's going to carry you over post wrestling career is your brand. So now, were you thinking about brand back then? I mean, 'cause you were very young, but did you still with the thinking about I'm going to market myself and really beyond your wrestling years, or is that didn't come in yet?
I wouldn't say then as like I've gotten much better about it recently, like trying to develop stuff, like especially because I've tried to evolve and I was working with NWA, so you have a platform to do it, and through that I kind of created Sexy Jesus, which is kind of a new nickname. And again, I know that's blasphemous, and that's not something you could use at the WWE level
Yeah.
because of that. But it's still it's one of those funny things that like somebody had tagged me in a comment of that, and I chuckled over it, and then I used it in a promo at NWA, like a backstage promo
Yeah.
leading into a match, and the crowd was chanting it. That same night, it got
Yeah.
over, and the T-shirts sold like crazy. So,
Yeah.
I'm much, and again, you have the tool of social media now,
Yeah.
so I do use that, like
Yeah.
at least in terms of Instagram. Like I still am not a TikToker, and very, I go on Twitter like a little bit, but I'm not as big on Twitter. Like Instagram for me is good and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
user friendly. But so no, I don't think I thought as much in those terms back then as I would now. Like, and it only makes sense, right? There's a lot of things that I know now
Mm.
that I think about that I wish I could have known at 22. Even just little like ways to approach the business and whatnot. Like I'll constantly be finding these things where I'm like, oh man, like this is something you needed to know early on. Like, just
Yeah.
a little thing. Like for instance, like, people tend to be very critical of themselves and like, but like at the same time, like if you can't watch yourself and be a fan, how can anybody else? So it's like,
Right.
really what I'm saying is like you have to be a fan of yourself. Like this can be very hard to make anybody else. So like, I was fighting a losing battle early on by not having that knowledge. If I had that knowledge early on, I would have like approached that very seriously
Yeah.
because it's helpful.
Yeah. But to be fair, though, Chris, I mean, you were so young and you got thrust into it so quickly. Going back to what you said earlier about, people being very critical of you in the ring. I remember watching your first few matches. I mean, you did a stellar job for what were you with 21 or 20 at the time when you came?
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, again, for that amount of experience and being put on the #1 wrestling show in the world, that kind of pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look back at like it's pretty damn good for that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there was still much more work to be done, obviously, but like, gosh, to be like in there, and holding my weight with the
Yeah.
top guys in the business, like, I mean, because that's a nerve-wracking thing. I mean, people don't realize that, you know, as stressful as like maybe even just a regular show or match or live event will be, like when you're about to walk out on live Raw is War
Mhm.
or live on pay-per-view and the pyro's going off and all that, and you have this has been your dream since you were
Yeah.
a little kid.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be hard to enjoy because it's very stressful. It's
Yeah.
live, like, and
Yeah.
what's happening out there, there's no, second take or anything like that. So,
Right.
and you constantly, it's hard to not think. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, don't mess up, like,
Yeah.
because the whole world's gonna see it.
Yeah.
So,
Plus, not only that, Chris, is to think 10 years prior to that, you're like, what, 11? So you're 11 so in that 10-year period. Yeah. So you've still got to deal with that. And the anxiety that I had a conversation with Jacques Rougeau about that the other day, the Mountie. And
yeah.
he was telling me, the nerves, they never go away. So how was that for you? I mean, anxiety, how did you deal with anxiety before going out there?
You got to do a lot of warming up, and you kind of try to get your heart rate going, but then you also try to, like, for me, it became about steadying my breathing because you when you get real nervous, you stop breathing or your
Right.
breathing is out of sync. So a lot of times I would try to stop and make sure I slow down and take a deep breath and try to use that as my calming mechanism and carry that, because all it takes is a couple deep breaths that you really invest yourself into, and your body will
Mhm.
naturally calm. And like, because it's almost like you got to slow yourself down because you're so like up, you're about to go live, there's pyro music, it's like, you got to just
Mhm.
relax. And I still, tell people that to this day. You know what I mean? Like it's very, very important thing. You know what I mean? Is you're never gonna, even on the indie level, you're always gonna be up.
Yeah.
If you love this and this has been all you want to do, you're always gonna be up. So the challenge is to really actually bring yourself down, slow your roll. You know what I
Okay.
mean? So you're not all over the place, or you're not perpetuating more anxiety, or
Right.
you know.
Right. You got to keep it cool. Chris, we've got about 10 minutes left before I know you've got some other obligations. So I'm going to bring it to a certain point where we can leave it and do a part two. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you leave WWE, then you go to Impact. Am I correct? Impact Wrestling.
Yeah, yeah.
So did that come about? Did they scout you? How did that come about? And how did you enjoy that transition?
Well, it came about because of Jeff Jarrett. JEFFJA. No, so we don't need to go. But I'd started working with him on Rinka King, and I think he might have reached out to me, or Rudy Charles might have reached out to me, who was an associate of him, who's now I think a referee in WWE. I think maybe right now. But anyways, I worked with Jeff on Rinka King, which was basically a television show they produced in India that had a group of American wrestlers or domestic wrestlers, and then a group of wrestlers from India that were trained
Okay.
for that specific show. And and we were kind of designated to work with these guys. Everybody was picked because they at least had enough level of experience that they could carry a very green Indian wrestler. And we could put them on the show and get them over and whatnot. So it started there. That went well. That was a good experience for all, and a good way for introduction to Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next time I worked with Jeff was Global Force Wrestling. He was starting,
yeah,
which eventually, basically, I think TNA, something had gone down in TNA. I'm trying to remember what it was at the time, but basically, all I know is we were shooting Global Force Wrestling, and the next thing I know, Jeff is now involved with TNA Wrestling. And so then I was brought into that fold. And I remember our first time showing up, there was a group of us who were, like outsiders, so to speak. It was all the Global Force wrestlers coming in for an Impact taping. And, I think they were doing an angle with Bruce Pritchard and Jim Cornette eventually. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But basically, it was through Jeff Jarrett and through those working experiences that I eventually went to Impact Wrestling.
Yeah. And you became Chris Adonis at that time, or were you still Chris Masters?
No, Chris Adonis. Jeff had somebody come up with that name for Rinky King. And so then it stuck in Global Force, then it was carried over to TNA, and then you fast forward to now when I use it, like NWA and use it in any kind of televised setting. And to me, honestly, in my head, there's kind of a separation between the two now, because to me, Chris Masters kind of symbolizes, the crew cut, the bigger guy, more based on that, where, Chris Adonis is more now sexy Jesus, right? Like the long hair, a little sleeker, more athletic, but, just a stud, but not a meathead necessarily, more of a pretty boy, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting that you grew your hair back too, because I remember for many years you had the short hair. When I first met you, you had the ponytail. So, yeah.
Wow. We go back to that. And I cut it, and I was so happy to. But, at that age, you don't know what you're doing with it. Like, my hair was terrible. And also, I had such a young face. I would never wear it out because I felt feminine, because, you don't have any facial hair, and you just kind of think you look like, you look like a female a little bit.
Yeah.
So
no lines on your face yet.
Yeah,
no
nothing like
lines.
that. No, but and again, I didn't know how to care for hair either, so it was like really kind of ratty and stuff. But yeah, now at least I'm an adult, so I know how to properly care for my hair, and it actually working out quite fine.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. So but in when you were working with Jeff and you were working with Impact, did you have more creative freedom with them as opposed to WWE?
Yeah, I think so, because they didn't know exactly. They were just kind of thrust in that position, and then you got all these new talents, and they don't know exactly what they're doing yet. And eventually they paired me with LA Knight, which was actually pretty awesome. I didn't know anything about. He was Eli Drake at the time, but I didn't know much about him outside of I'd seen him at a couple indie shows, and he just kind of seemed like a douche a little bit, to be quite honest. Like
Okay.
not, and a lot of people get that impression initially, or did at least of
Yeah.
him. But then, fast forward to my experience in TNA, and I found out very quickly that he was, he was cool, just a hardworking guy. He's cool, fun to hang out with.
Mhm.
We had a lot of common interests and stuff, so it was actually like a perfect kind of alliance or partnership for us, I think.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Chris. Well, what we're going to do then is we're going to leave it there because that will give me a nice way to jump off into the next interview. And we haven't even got to the good stuff yet because we haven't got to the life stuff yet. But it's a, well, you're going to say something, Chris?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that sounds awesome. I don't know, like I want to look at my schedule, but I'm hoping that maybe if we might be able to do this even next Saturday if you're
Okay.
available, depending, like kind of like the same time, because I like having these settings here, the hotel's wide open and stuff and all
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah, no, that should be good. So Chris, just stay on the line for a moment. I'll just say goodbye to the viewers. So thank you everybody for joining us for this, the part 1 of the Chris Masters interview. Chris, it's been a pleasure having you on. Nice seeing you again. It's been 22 years, but yeah, it's
yeah,
a lot. Yeah,
nice seeing you too, and thanks for having me on. And I'm looking forward to part 2. Let's do it.
absolutely. All right, until next time, everybody. This has been Chris Masters, and we'll see you next time.